Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to In My Feelings, a safe space to talk all things NBA. I'm your host, Big Waz. Let's go. All right, guys. The Lakers season has officially come to a close. And what an insane, crazy whirlwind season it was. Culminating, man, with the biggest trade possibly in NBA history. Certainly the one that caused the most waves since I've been, a sort of obsessive NBA watcher, man. And I don't even think it's close. And that was acquiring Luka Doncic. I think the regular season, bringing Luka in mid-season, him coming off of a pretty significant injury with the calf situation that he was nursing, even back from the Christmas Day game that he played while he was still a Dallas Maverick. I think the Lakers did about as well as you could have expected. There was probably a revision by even myself included in the media collectively where when Luka first got to LA, everybody felt like, well, the roster balance is completely thrown out of whack. They have no big men. They have very limited guard play and even wing play, to be honest with you. And so, this is not a move made in order to get the Lakers to the championship this year, but, they're very well set up for the future with this guy who's already made 4 All NBA teams and hadn't turned 26 yet, and et cetera, et cetera. But then the Lakers had a nice, run with Luka in the lineup. And I think people, myself included, were like, oh, this team is better than we thought they were. And we do this thing where like you have that 3 in front of your name on the seeding list and the Wolves have a 6. And it's like, well, they're clearly a much better team. Look how much more highly seeded they are than Minnesota. But in the case, when the real honest truth is Minnesota was peaking towards the end of the regular season, particularly Julius Randle. And they were just a way more well-rounded, well-balanced team. They got ball handlers in Ant Edwards and Mike Conley, and even secondarily in Dante DiVincenzo. They have a bunch of wing defenders. They have an incredible big man front court rotation. They have enough shooting. Like they just had a team with way less holes than the Lakers so obviously had. The biggest one being just absolutely zero front court depth whatsoever. Jackson Hayes turned himself into a serviceable, I would say at this point, backup level center rotational guy, but nobody's idea of a quality starting center in the league, and certainly not in a matchup against a team like the Wolves who are throwing waves of bigs at you, to the point where the last 2 games of this season, JJ Redick, the coach, lost all faith in the big man rotation and just straight up he went an all small lineup for 24 minutes to end game 4, which they ultimately ended up losing in a fourth quarter collapse. And then in game 5, he started that lineup, and the only big that he brought in was Maxi Kleber. So this offseason, the Lakers have a lot to sort of address in making this roster a more whole version of what they ultimately want to be. LeBron has a player option on his contract. That's another thing that they have to think about. The early scuttlebutt is that he's going to get an extension. He's going to get a no trade. So they got to get that squared away. They also, another thing, they traded for Mark Williams, who I guess had the last laugh, as he so eloquently tweeted a smiley face emoji at the end of that Laker game. And so big man, how they get a big man in, are they going to go with a scrap heap guy, which is like, if you're not playing any big men at all, can that really be the option that you try to find a guy for, below the mid-level, or perhaps like you try to get a draft pick and trade for something to get a guy in the 20s? Like, who knows what they do in that direction. I think the reality of the team construction has to address the fact that LeBron, as great as he is for a 40-year-old, is going to be 41 years old next year. And I think we saw in this series the way that Ant Edwards and even Julius Randle were able to put their imprint on this series in the biggest moments, particularly in the fourth quarters of games. LeBron just didn't have it. Like, he didn't have a matchup that he could automatically attack and exploit. And he's just not the one-on-one kind of player that he was even in, say, 2020, which feels like a lifetime ago and is. It's 5 years ago. 2020, he was just a different player athletically and physically. And I think in moments, man, when the Lakers really needed to some level of shot creation and orchestration, like LeBron could exploit several matchups against every single playoff opponent. That just was not the case against the Wolves, where Rudy Gobert had no problem guarding this guy in moments. Julius Randle did a pretty decent job. Guys like Nas Reed, et cetera. Nickeil Alexander-Walker gets switched on him at times, and he's like not like putting Minnesota's defense in a pattern. And I can hear Laker fans saying, like, look, this was a completely horrible matchup for the Lakers, especially with the slapstick nature of the roster construction, and they can be better against a Wolves matchup in the future. But I think they do need to contend with that fact that LeBron just isn't, an A1 level superstar. And again, that's not a diss. This guy has been in the NBA for 2 freaking decades. Okay. He's been in the NBA since the first administration. Okay. It's okay that he's not some supernova anymore. It's uncomfortable to say, but I don't think Luka was even close to being the best player in this series. And what do I mean by that? It just never felt like Minnesota and their defensive integrity were ever put into a bind, were ever put into panic because of what Luka Doncic was doing out here. It's basically like, look, Luka, if you're going to make a bunch of impossible shots, have at it, go ahead. We're going to keep the integrity and the shape of our defense no matter what. And I think that was a big part of why Minnesota was able to dominate this series. Ant Edwards, on the other hand, JJ Redick is contorting his defense into like a myriad of different kinds of gimmicks and trickeration to try to deal with the fact that nobody on the Lakers roster had a chance in hell of dealing with Ant Edwards, right? And I think you saw that major difference in this series. And, you could say Luka's still coming back from the calf, and even in the elimination game, he like suffered a back injury from a hard foul that he sustained. And you could say all of those things. I just think, look, man, there wasn't a lot of times that Luka looked like the most dominant version of Luka Doncic that we've seen in the past. And I think that's a scary proposition, that a dude who's only 26 might physically have peaked already. I think there's a reason why Nico Harrison wanted to get off this guy. Look, I'm not relitigating that. He didn't get enough of the Luka deal, whatever. But if you want to have a criticism of Luka, I think you saw it in this series. Some of just the lack of effort and attention to detail on defense in many big moments and many big possessions, and he just didn't dominate. So these are things to think about where, look, if I'm wrong and Luka's able to physically get back to the guy that he was in 2022 and even 23 or even 24 when he got to the finals, which I would argue he was still physically kind of limited in last season's playoffs. But if he can physically get back to the guy that he was 3 years ago, who's a quicker guy, the kind of guy that Nas Reed and Al Horford can't guard on an island, then the Lakers roster construction becomes so much less complicated. It's like we have the Nikola Jokic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander type of guy who is a high-functioning, efficient offense into and unto himself. If he becomes that guy again, the roster construction is simple. You don't need to have, offensive-minded guys always, as long as you have these wing help on defense and big man help on defense, and let Luka's greatness sort of the rising tide of his greatness lift all the boats around him. That becomes the proposition. And then, you have a credible secondary creator, even in Austin Reeves, if you must say. But Austin is somebody who also got exposed on defense Love Austin, love his contract, all of that stuff. But playing Luka and Austin at the same time, you present opposing offenses with big, bright bullseyes to attack. So the Lakers, I think, have a lot to figure out in the offseason. I'm not somebody who's ever thought that Rob Pelinka has been the most creative, the most gem finding kind of, player personnel executive. But hey, man, he got his extension. He'll prove me wrong. He's about to win executive of the year for convincing Nico Harrison that AD was enough to pull off a Luka deal. So yeah, I think they got a lot of questions. But it's centered on Luka Doncic. It's on him. If the Lakers are going to get back to being a championship quality team, it's going to be because Luka Doncic is playing like a bona fide MVP kind of candidate, the way the Jokic's and the Sheas do. Because they're not going to be able to put together a top to bottom complete roster the way Boston has. They don't have the assets. A lot of these guys need to be homegrown, meaning you need to draft them or sign them as unsigned free agents, as scrap heat guys or whatever. Or you get them in very favorable deals like they did with Porzingis for Marcus Smart, or like they did when they brought in Drew Holiday, right? They need to they're not going to be able to put a roster together that way. They're going to have to be able to do it kind of like Dallas did last year. And these deals that people don't think are obviously great, that the Lakers are just smart enough to make because they know what they have in Luka Doncic. And so we'll see, man. I'm intrigued to see what they put together this offseason. Laker fans should be happy that Luka Doncic is in their building and they get to watch him going forward. But yeah, man, really intriguing offseason coming up for these guys. All right, folks, that's our show for today. Make sure you subscribe to the Ringer NBA's YouTube page. Make sure you're hitting that notification bell so that you get that alert every single time we drop a brand new In My Feelings. And of course, like this video, share this video. It helps us with that algorithm. We will see you guys next week. Peace out.